Kingdom Hearts 3 had a very bad reception when its release from both longtime fans and casual players, with most content creators complaining about the game's story and pacing issues, and the community reception was mostly negative, with complaints all around. I'm glad that Kingdom Hearts 3's reputation has been improving over time, but I still feel like this game deserves more praise for what it is and what it accomplishes. So in this video I'll be presenting my defense for Kingdom Hearts 3, but I'll also talk about what didn't work and could have been better. First off, I'll start with the argument that this game had such an enormous hype around it that it was simply impossible for it to live up to people's expectations. Some Kingdom Hearts fans may get angry when I say this, but I waited for Kingdom Hearts 3 ever since I saw Kingdom Hearts 2's ending, waiting 13 years until the game was released. I realized Kingdom Hearts 3 was in development only for 7 years, but the hype around it started way before its development. Kingdom Hearts 2 ends with this teaser of Sora's next journey, and players were left to wonder how the next mainline game was going to be. So for 13 years, people made their perfect version of the game inside their heads, imagining all sorts of worlds to explore with their favorite Disney content, different playable characters, and much more. I did that myself, and I saw countless people doing the same in all sorts of forums.
I want to visit all worlds from the previous games. I want every Keyblade wielder to be a playable character. I want to defeat Xehanort as Pumbaa.
And as time went by, the myth surrounding Kingdom Hearts 3 only grew larger and larger. The very first teaser trailer was already a huge shock to the community because it felt like Kingdom Hearts 3 would never be made. After Kingdom Hearts 2, we got multiple games, but never any talk about Kingdom Hearts 3. And seemingly out of nowhere, Square Enix gave us a trailer at E3 2013. Looking back on it, the first trailer was also a hasty move from Square Enix. They had just started development for Kingdom Hearts 3 at the time, which is shown by how short the trailer is and how most of it was footage from early stages of development. This is never a good idea since it not only increases expectations, but it also increases people's demand for the game to be launched. And let's face it, 7 years was a long development cycle, which added more to the reputation of that one game that'll never be released, to the point that even people who knew nothing about Kingdom Hearts were hyped to play it themselves. No game can live up to that hype, we've seen it so many times now. The same exact thing happened with Final Fantasy XV for instance. So getting the final product was bound to be disappointing compared to the game you've been dreaming of for years and years. Now, I know the game also has its flaws, I'm not saying it doesn't, and most of it comes down to the pacing of the story. You'll be exploring Disney worlds in very light-hearted settings for most of the game, with some small story brushes in between here and there until you reach the last world, which brings the so-desired conclusion to the story the franchise had been building up. Many people, including myself, wondered, why take such an approach to the storytelling? Why cram it all at the end? Now it feels rushed and not well developed. All of it comes down to one fact. During the whole game, I had this thought in my head, and this was actually confirmed by co-director Yasue himself in an interview. This game was made for a casual audience. You can see how the game approaches this in every angle. First, the story keeps making summaries of previous games, with characters explaining references left and right during the cutscenes. Second, the gameplay is very easy. On release, Kingdom Hearts 3 had 3 difficulty modes, and even on the hardest one at the time, it was all pretty easy, with players gaining very good abilities very early on in the journey. Third, and my personal favorite, side quests and postgame were streamlined to be considerably simpler and more focused on the fun sides of Kingdom Hearts, avoiding any repetitive and grinding tasks. It shouldn't be a shock that I, as a huge Kingdom Hearts fan, will say that it was a bad idea developing Kingdom Hearts 3 with a casual audience in mind, but I'd say I have a pretty good case for myself here. As most people know, Kingdom Hearts 3 was declared multiple times by director Tetsuya Nomura himself to be the last chapter in the Dark Seeker saga. It meant that this was the last game with Xehanort being the main villain, and that we would get closure from all previous games that came before it. Chain of Memories, Birth by Sleep, 358 over 2 days, seriously, all of them. Now, is that the best game to be made with a casual audience in mind? I understand wanting to draw new fans with a title that, like we said, had a lot of spotlight drawn to it, and I'm all up for getting Kingdom Hearts new fans. The franchise deserves it. But Kingdom Hearts has a lot of lore, and it's simply impossible trying to explain previous JRPG games while trying to create a new story. Can you imagine a book series have its last installment aimed at people that never read the previous books? This made Kingdom Hearts 3 a contradiction. It didn't know what to settle for. So the easiest solution to this was what we got. A casual story for the most part of it, and the ending had all the content it set out to have as a last entry in a saga. That led to the pacing issues the game clearly has. So that ultimately hurt fans who had been following the story for so long, while casual players couldn't really keep up with the main story and just had to endure the sprinkled story segments while playing the campaign. While all agreed that new players probably didn't understand the recaps and couldn't grasp the main story, I'll say the ending was very satisfying. There are so many iconic moments, even back when the DLC Remind hadn't come out. Remind added a lot of fantastic content, mind you, but the original game held up great. If you've played Birth by Sleep and 358 over 2 days and the reunion scenes from the trios doesn't get you emotional, you're probably heartless. The animation is fantastic, and I cried my eyes out as they were all finally together after all they'd been through. And the Disney content is probably the best it has ever been in Kingdom Hearts. Ever since Kingdom Hearts 1, the Disney worlds always felt disjointed from Sora and the main characters, as if they completely forgot the purpose of their own journey in them. In Kingdom Hearts 3, however, they strive to make the main villains interact with the Disney casts, giving their appearance more meaning to the narrative, while also allowing Sora's development through his journey with themes close to the main story. This can also be seen with the worlds Monsters Inc. and Big Hero 6 continue the story after their own movies, adding lore to Pixar's IPs. I still find this kinda surreal that Disney allowed such a thing to happen, but I'm glad they did. It's pretty satisfying. So though these two parts are contradictory, they were both well made and are satisfying experiences in their own rights. If Kingdom Hearts is to continue to make use of Disney worlds, I hope they keep up the great work that Kingdom Hearts 3 brought, with more faithful characters, cast, and fun storytelling that isn't just a chore, like in Dream Drop Distance or even Kingdom Hearts 2. And though they should fix the pacing and add more main story content during the journey and not just have it all at the end, I know they continue to bring amazing moments and twists like we had in Kingdom Hearts 3. Another small detail is that there's a lot of cutscenes that try to move the plot forward, but they don't work well because there are a lot of exposition. There's a lot of telling while it's better showing to the player or being more interactive. Whenever you complete a few set of worlds, you get a cutscene of Sora in the Gummy ship talking to people on his phone. And I think that that's pretty cool too, like they're discussing plot points over a smartphone. It's amazing how they have now phones in the franchise. That this was severely overused. It would have been better to have a few cutscenes in this format, but this happens during the whole game. If instead we had to visit characters in their own worlds, had some exploration to do in the meantime, it would have felt more like we were living these discussions and not just seeing them. This cutscene format is too stiff and gets old very quickly. Reworking these cutscenes would change drastically how the story flows and would even fix most of the pacing issues. Moving on to a different topic, I think it's not said enough how gorgeous this game is. Probably because it's not ultra realistic like Uncharted or even the most recent Final Fantasy VII Remake, but Kingdom Hearts 3 has some of the most breathtaking environments and impressive character models of its console generation. The game is incredibly polished and has amazing visuals and effects, and older consoles would not be able to bring it to life at this level. The work made to capture the essence of each Disney world is superb. Every place has its own visual style, and that affects how characters are rendered, including Sora, Donald, and Goofy. When you visit the Caribbean, their skins look dry, rough, and even Sora's teeth matches the place. Okay, sorry, maybe that's a little gross. Going to Monsters Inc. has Sora and the game take a monstrous form, designed together with animators responsible for the movies to create authentic forms that match their own design's ideas for the movies. This is also shown in gameplay. The visual effects are astounding. It's so satisfying to unleash magic, especially the highest tiers, and see how it impacts the environments. Summons and attractions are flashy and look fantastic,
with water effects, fire, and their lighting makes it look magical. They match up great to their abilities and what they convey to the player. With its casual approach to an action JRPG, Kingdom Hearts 3 packs tons of gameplay elements with lots of colorful visuals and fun over-the-top animations to keep players engaged during all of their journey. This is mostly seen in the form change aspect of the game. In Kingdom Hearts 3, every Keyblade you have allows you to change into different forms. You attack enemies long enough and you're prompted the option to change Sora's form, which grants you new combos, movement, and abilities. They are all very flashy and fun to use since they all have their own uniqueness, even changing how Sora looks and moves. Usually in action JRPGs, to keep things from getting repetitive, your characters get new combos and abilities through their journey, and Kingdom Hearts 3 also takes this approach. But on top of that, you have this new layer with the form changes. Every time you clear a world, you'll be granted a new Keyblade, and that in turn will give you new forms to play around with. The game introduces many new systems to develop this as well. Kingdom Hearts 3 is the first Kingdom Hearts game that allows players to equip 3 Keyblades at once, allowing Sora to quickly change his weapon of choice with the press of a button. This introduces a number of mechanics. First, you can save form changes to use later by changing the weapon you currently have on. Second, you can change Keyblades mid-combo, allowing all sorts of different combos to come to life. Third, you can pick Keyblades with best synergy not only for your combos but for overall use in battles, and the list goes on. This is further developed with another system, weapon improvements. Most JRPGs out there will give you new weapons as you explore the world, but that makes your previous weapons obsolete with no real use to the player. Unless you're looking for a super long list of items that aren't any good to you, then it's perfect. In Kingdom Hearts 3, all weapons can be enhanced until they reach the same level. Some will be better for attacking, others for magic, some will be balanced for both, others not so much. The point is, you pick your favorites, and you can use them all until the end of the game. I personally love that this allowed me to use the first weapon, the Kingdom Key, in the endgame, as it's Sora's main Keyblade, but you could never really use it in the other games without it being a handicap to you. Outside weapons, Sora is allowed to use the best abilities he learned in the previous games. Summons are few, but consider the most iconic Disney characters, some who also were a huge part of Kingdom Hearts, and calling for their help is both fun and a blast of nostalgia. Magic in Kingdom Hearts 3 adds a new layer of complexity to battles, allowing Sora to use elements to stun enemies by using their weaknesses, but also impacting on the environment. Using Blizzard will leave a trail on the ground that Sora can slide on, Arrow creates a tornado that allows Sora to make huge jumps, and so on. I wish they added more elements to our use, like we've seen in the side games with Balloon and Gravity, but Magic in Kingdom Hearts is one of the most well-made magic systems in RPGs I've ever seen. The EMP bar being finite, but also rechargeable on its own, establishes a system that encourages the player to use magic, but also limits the player to not over-rely on it. So simple, yet so effective. Attractions are introduced for the first time in the series, and they work similarly to summons. The difference is that you use Disney Park rides for this one. They're all highly interactive and flashy, my favorite one probably being Splash Run, which allows you to create your own path through the enemies as you move around. You don't actually get to pick when these are available, which was probably to limit its use to areas that worked better for the camera or movements, which are another sign of the game's casual approach to gameplay. Attractions don't have any cost to them like summons or magic, so it's there to spice things up. Limits also have the same approach. They're random attacks that you can perform with teammates, but the option to use them appear at random and they have no cost. This one is equally flashy and adds more variety to gameplay. I found some of these to be too stiff and too much free damage. I would have loved if they involved some kind of quick time event to make things more interactive. If players missed, the attack wouldn't go through, or you could deal more damage if you got it perfectly. Lastly, Shotlocks introduce a special attack that deals lots of damage but has limited use by having its own gauge. Each Keyblade has its own shot lock and they're pretty simple to use. You just have to aim at enemies and lock on as many targets as possible while avoiding using up all your gauge. You can see how much stuff is on Kingdom Hearts 3's gameplay, and it's all there to make things as fun as it can for the player. Once again, we can see the casual approach of the game in this. A lot of bombastic abilities, some of which don't even have limitations or a cost to use. So many mechanics working together makes for varying gameplay that isn't as tiring, so they complement each other in that sense. The game also takes its time explaining every single one of these abilities with a very hands-on approach, unlocking mechanics slowly through the first world. Kingdom Hearts 3 even explained classical abilities you can equip like aerial recovery, and they never explained its specific abilities in previous games. I guess developers really wanted new players to get to know the most crucial abilities and have a smoother experience, and it shows. There isn't any requirement to master all of these mechanics, and players can use whatever makes them happiest. For example, I didn't use shot locks a lot, and I tried to avoid using attractions, so I mostly use farm changes for the easy to use approach, and also magic because I love using it in RPGs. Everyone finds their own style. For the more veteran players, Kingdom Hearts 3 made tweaks to make it more enjoyable for them as well. The Day 1 edition really didn't have much to offer for them, so they introduced Critical Mode later, which was a new difficulty that, let me tell you, is the hardest difficulty I've seen in Kingdom Hearts. Players can also equip an ability that stops limits and attractions from popping up, but makes farm change appear more consistently, so it relies more on player skill and less on these abilities. And this was all before the release of the paid DLC. This is a free update. Kingdom Hearts 3 has also the best level design of the franchise by far. Kingdom Hearts 1 included some platforming elements in its gameplay, and they were good at the time, but the game hasn't aged that well compared to the others. Ever since that game, however, Kingdom Hearts had less and less platforming all around. Kingdom Hearts 2 went for smaller areas, mostly linear, and the exploration is really simple and flat even. The same can be said for Birth by Sleep, Chain of Memories, and 358 over 2 days, mostly. Developers first wanted to bring back platforming with Dream Drop Distance. With a huge focus on free movement, they made areas much bigger, requiring jumps and slides all around for you to reach treasure chests and your destinations. The game still had its limitations on a 3DS, and while locations were big, they were mostly empty. Now Kingdom Hearts 3 expands on Dream Drop Distance, delivering once again big environments, but now with chests and more exploration elements like lucky emblems or even taking your own pictures. They introduced vertical levels while also limiting your movement a little as to not break the level design, which was a problem in Dream Drop Distance. The worlds now readily have transition screens, which makes them more fluid and better to explore, like you're actually walking around and exploring and not playing a game with different sections. Each world also has its own feel to it. Not everything is expansive and open. Some levels are more linear, like Monstropolis, while others purely open like San Francisco, because it's supposed to feel like a big city full of things to do and tall buildings. Olympus, on the other hand, alternates between open and linear. When you're on a road, of course the environment would be linear with a few branching paths here and there, but you eventually end up in more open areas like squares so you can dash around and explore more. You also have NPCs for the first time in the franchise, which makes cities actually look like cities. And they talk about your characters and about the location you're in, which creates much better ambience compared to previous games. This is something that also disappeared ever since Kingdom Hearts 1, which is pretty obvious when you look at Kingdom Hearts 2's towns. Like, who could possibly live in a place like Kingdom Hearts 2 Agrabah, or in a minuscule Halloween town? Kingdom Hearts 3 has the most fun post-game of the franchise by far. Like I mentioned before, they streamlined the content to focus on what's fun to do, and not endless chores to complete the journal. I remember Kingdom Hearts 2 had so many minigames, and you had to get a minimum score on all of them to complete objectives. Some were brutal too, they required specific abilities to be equipped in order for it to be possible.
Like, you had this poster minigame you had to complete in 30 seconds, but in order for that to be possible, you would have to level up a hidden form to unlock the ability to glide, and even then you have to find a good route to be able to do it in 30 seconds. What's up with that? In Kingdom Hearts 3, you still have to complete objectives for some minigames, but they don't require extreme setups or hidden abilities. It's just a minigame for real. There are much less minigames, and most of them just ask you to play them once with no objectives to complete, like the minigames in Classic Kingdom. They're all pretty short, and if you don't want to play them, you can just boot it up and lose it immediately. The minigame that Kingdom Hearts 3 focuses more on is the Lucky Emblems. You have to photograph these Mickey shapes that are hidden throughout the levels, and some can be pretty hard to spot. For those who just want to complete it, Googling will do the job extremely well, and will reveal where they are instantly, so it's very simple. And in Kingdom Hearts 3, unlocking the secret movie revolves only on finding the lucky emblems, while the rest of the minigames are there for the fun of it, or if you're a completionist. Most achievements, trophies are pretty easy to get to, and you complete them all fairly easily, with only a few requiring some sort of grind. Everything is really straightforward, and I appreciate that. Once again, we see developers aiming for a casual audience with much less minigames and simpler trophies for total completion. Kingdom Hearts 3 also cuts on the post-game by not having any Colosseum challenges, which honestly are overused in RPGs. And there's only one secret boss fight in the original game, a Heartless called the Dark Inferno. Now this boss got a lot of complaints from the community, because it is indeed an easy boss, and yes, there's only one. But the original version of Kingdom Hearts 2 also had one secret boss, which was Sephiroth, and beating Sephiroth at level 99 was pretty easy back then too, just like Dark Inferno. The challenge was always about your setup and level. If you wanted more challenge in Kingdom Hearts 2 and 3, you had to go out of your way to have lower levels and worse equipment. The community has this consensus that the Remind DLC was a huge improvement to the original game, and while I'll agree that it added a lot of great content, I don't believe it fixed Kingdom Hearts 3. The original game was a great experience on its own, a game that focused on delivering a casual JRPG game for a broader audience, and delivers it. I still don't think casual was the best focus for development in this case, and the game has its flaws, but I see Kingdom Hearts 3 for what it is. Fun! When you look at it without any crazy expectations or infinite hype, you see that it builds itself from all previous installments but manages to create its own identity, with lots of new ideas and polished gameplay and visuals. And for Kingdom Hearts fans, the main story is here, full of emotional scenes and the over-the-top dialogue we all know and love. While there's no excuse for Nomura's terrible writing skills when it comes to women characters in Kingdom Hearts 3, and there's little hope of improvement since it happened again in Melody of Memory, I hope he learns from this game, as Square is probably developing the next Kingdom Hearts game as we speak. You fix the pacing and build up from the gameplay that Kingdom Hearts 3 has set up, and you have an absolute uncontested masterpiece in your hands. I am here again with a huge ass video, but I've been thinking on this subject for 2 years now, ever since I played Kingdom Hearts 3 myself and watched a terrible first impression from the community and other reviewers who somehow didn't expect a JRPG from one of the most JRPG franchises to ever exist. I'm glad I managed to come up with the words to say it. It was a huge relief writing it all down, to be honest. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing, you know the drill. I really appreciate any feedback you may have for me as well. That was it, and see you folks around. Falou e até mais.